Chapter 1885 Team Battle. As agreed by both sides, each side sent out 3 members to fight. Liang Yu's opponent was Lancelot, the Knight of Judgment. Flower's opponent was Percival, the Holy Knight. Fatty Sue's opponent was Gawain, the Sun Knight. The 3 battlefields were located outside the main battlefield between Liang Yu and King Arthur, on 3 secondary battlefields above the endless ice ocean. When he saw Liang Yu, a flash of grief crossed Lancelot's eyes. He still remembered when he first saw Liang Yu and the others. At that time, even Liang Yu had struggled to fight him. Back then, Liang Yu was not even worthy of a second glance. However, in less than 2 years, this kind of person was actually standing on the opposite side of him. Is this God's punishment for me? Lancelot looked up at the sky, and scenes from his life flashed before his eyes. I come from a family of nobles, and since birth I have been a genius among millions. After the end of the world, I quickly awakened my supernatural powers, and was hailed as a genius hard to come by in the world. There was no bottleneck in my breakthrough to the Epsilon realm. But then, ever since I encountered that monster, Pendragon, my life has been completely different. In the end, I even have to watch 2 people who humiliated me fight here, and I have to stay here and play with a minion. His gaze sank, and murderous intent spread from his eyes. Fine, I'll quickly finish you off here. If I can't deal with chaos, I can take out his underlings to vent my anger. Anyway, accompanied by the sound of metal rubbing, his sword was unsheathed. I'll just leave you alive, right? Liang Yu sensed Lancelot's murderous intent. Without saying a word, she took a Han Dynasty 8-sided sword from the weapon case on her back. Her opponent was using a sword, so she would use a sword too. The battlefield between the 2 was an island reef, only about 100 meters long, which was extremely small. But for 2 mutants who used swords, it couldn't have been better. In close combat, the slightest difference could determine victory or defeat. Liang Yu stood still, dragon's roar in her left hand and her right hand in an empty fist. The 8-sided sword is not a normal sword. It is used for assassination and parrying, not for heavy clashes. It is completely different from the opponent's knight's 2-handed sword. In a battle between experts, the first person to strike is likely to make a mistake. Liang Yu evened her breathing. For just a moment, her entire world fell completely silent. Unity of heaven and humanity, a state of nothing. Forget the self, forget the enemy, have no fear in your heart, and your hands will not tremble, your eyes will not be confused, and your ears will not buzz. In this state, you can bring your body's potential to full play. Liang Yu once said that Liang Yu's ability index didn't seem high, but she had the ability to surpass others with a higher ability index and defeat them in an instant. It was because her body had already been developed to the extreme. Lancelot didn't care about that. The knight's charge came from a fearless and powerful fighting spirit. He raised his greatsword high in his right hand, and a shield with a cross pattern appeared in his left hand, except that the cross had been slashed diagonally by something. Knight of Cross, fallen into the netherworld of hell, let my blood stain the flag of the rebel knight in heaven. Fallen sky ember flames. Black flames soared up into the sky, and the symbol of 666 on his face also twisted strangely, as if it were alive. The black fire of the underworld completely engulfed him, and the sky became dark. The black flames wrapped his body like armor. With sword and shield in hand, he gazed at Liang Yu before him and suddenly charged across the sky. In the blink of an eye, he became a burning black ray in the void, rushing to Liang Yu's front. Then his right hand's huge sword slashed down at her head. Clang! Liang Yu moved. She did not see how she moved, nor did she see how the sword left its sheath. It was only when her wrist shook and the long sword swung out that it made a crisp and melodious sound like a dragon's roar. A tremendous force was transmitted to Lancelot's arm, causing his body to suddenly lunge backwards 100 paces, and his body kept swaying. Liang Yu's sword forced him back directly, the sword pointing diagonally to the ground, and Liang Yu's eyes, which were looking at him, were already blank. However, this was not the end of the sparring, but only the beginning. Liang Yu came like a gust of wind, the breeze soft, her figure as light and swift as willow catkins in the wind, and the eight-sided sword seemed to float over, stabbing at Lancelot's body. It was so fast that it was almost impossible to dodge, but it looked as if it carried no killing power. This effortless swordplay made Lancelot's face change, and he hurriedly raised his sword to defend himself. After the eight-sided sword touched his heavy sword, it was like a long snake climbing a willow tree. Instead of forcibly bumping into him, it started to climb up his shoulder along his sword. A cold, slimy feeling made Lancelot's skin crawl. In an age when hot weapons prevailed, no one knew what the concept of a martial arts master meant. Choosing to fight Liang Yu up close was Lancelot's biggest mistake. The tip of the sword pierced his shoulder like a bamboo snake. One strike in his right arm would be completely disabled. Lancelot's pupils suddenly contracted, and suddenly, the power of the fallen sky ember flames erupted with full force. The terrifying black flames spewing from his body made Liang Yu feel the crisis. However, she was not at all panicked, but instead, she dodged to a distance in a flash. Liang Yu's supernatural ability index was only 23,000 points, while Lancelot's was a full 25,000 points. It would definitely be unwise to fight him head-on with supernatural energy. But her exquisite martial arts skills could make up for this huge gap. After her body stopped in the distance, Liang Yu didn't pause for a second, and immediately started running quickly around Lancelot. The steps of the 8 diagrams wandering palm. The most cunning thing about this kind of step is to circle around the enemy, leaving the opponent overwhelmed and dizzy. Put simply, it is a very useful fighting style for masters to tease novices. Liang Yu ran quickly, while at the same time the tip of her sword in her hand swept upwards and slashed diagonally, sending out streams of black sword energy, like translucent curtains, crashing towards Lancelot. Lancelot had no idea of Liang Yu's strength at all, because he didn't take her seriously. But Liang Yu knew his abilities. After every battle, Zhang Yi and the others would share information with each other. This comes from Zhang Yi's belief that information is the most precious thing for mutants. Whoever controls the information on the battlefield, controls the initiative. Liang Yu's sword attacks did not pause for a moment, and such attacks were not difficult for Lancelot to deal with. He raised his left hand holding the shield up. The shield was only the size of an arm, but it was burning with flames and emitting a huge wall of supernatural energy. These sword attacks were all absorbed. Liang Yu's attacks continued without pause. Her circle was getting smaller and smaller, so she was spinning faster and faster. And in between attacks, she took out a weapon gleaming with a cold light from her waist pocket. Aiming at Lancelot, she hurled it at him while attacking with her sword energy. Lancelot blocked Liang Yu's sword. By this time, he had slowly adapted to Liang Yu's attack rhythm and was planning to find an opportunity to counterattack. Suddenly, a dazzling silver light flashed in front of his eyes. Without hesitation, he slashed directly with his sword. However, he never expected that halfway through, the silver light suddenly avoided his sword like a snake, turning in the air at an extremely tricky angle and slashing towards his temple. It was so quick that it was almost as if it happened in an instant. By the time Lancelot reacted, the cold light was less than half a meter away from his body. He could feel the crisis of death. Sword and shield had already been used, so at this point he could not withdraw his weapons to meet the enemy again, and could only try his best to twist his body to avoid the attack. Pierce. The weapon passed directly next to his tactical helmet, making a harsh sound. Lancelot could feel a huge gash in his helmet. The silver light made a whoosh sound and disappeared. At this moment, he saw what it was in a daze. A flying sword, a white flying sword. It's hard to imagine that someone in the 21st century would still use this kind of weapon, but the flying sword launched by a black chariot-level enhancement mutant was faster than any bullet fired from any gun in the world. Although the strike missed, Liang Yu had already gotten everything she wanted. Lancelot's form was unsteady, and even the slightest movement required him to spend time adjusting, otherwise he would not be able to exert his full strength in battle. This is what Zhang Yi had said before, the crucial split second that a martial arts master strives for in one move. It is the unity of heaven and humanity. Liang Yu raised the sword in her hand, and at that moment, Lancelot's vision suddenly changed. He could no longer see the world, and it felt as if the world had suddenly become blurry, with only Liang Yu in front of him existing in reality. But his eyes could clearly see her, and his consciousness, his body, and his instinct to fight his enemy all clearly told him that there was no one in front of him at all. This feeling of separation between his mind and body made it impossible for him to lift his sword. What's the point of lifting a sword? To slice through nothingness? Maybe it was just an illusion. Liang Yu's sword came to Lancelot's eyes. It was only when the long sword pierced his body that the intense pain brought Lancelot back to his senses, making him realize clearly that the enemy in front of him was real. Bang! The battle suit that was burning with the blazing fire of hell on his body disintegrated with a loud noise, and the long sword plunged into his chest, taking his life in the next moment. Liang Yu was very confident in her swordsmanship. She could keep the tip of the sword half an inch outside Lancelot's heart, ensuring that she would not take his life. But in that instant, Lancelot had already reacted. Aha! An angry roar escaped his lips, and from his bare chest, a terrifying black flame erupted, heading straight for Liang Yu's face. Liang Yu, still not facing him directly, quickly dodged such a blow. Lancelot had used 2 bursts of supernatural power. This kind of technique was not uncommon for mutants, which was to gather supernatural energy and then shoot it out from all the acupuncture points of the body. This is a means of dealing with the enemy in times of crisis, but it also damages the user and is extremely costly. A grandmaster as skilled as Liang Yu would never use such a crude technique. Lancelot took a deep breath. The rhythm of the battlefield falling into the other party's hands made him very uncomfortable. He must admit at this point that he underestimated his opponent. That kind of exquisite combat skill definitely isn't average. Finally, he began to take this woman seriously. Very strong melee combat skills, you could even say she's a weapons master. But she's only an enhancement type, so her weak points are supernatural abilities and long-range attacks. So, he tensed his leg muscles, and the next moment, he quickly retreated backwards. As long as you keep your distance and constantly wear her down with long-range attacks, you'll be fine. Liang Yu saw Lancelot retreat and knew what he was planning. However, she was in no hurry at all. Instead, she planted her feet on the sea and, like a snake, darted towards her opponent. 2 dark shadows flashed across the sea. Boom! 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 Black flames shot up into the sky, heading towards Liang Yu. Liang Yu had to stop her body and swing her sword to break through the attack of these infernal black flames. After running far enough away, Lancelot began his own attack plan. Streams of black flames spewed from the tip of his sword, assaulting Liang Yu from super long distances. He had already realized that his opponent was not someone he could quickly take down. The best way to do this was to use his own advantage of having a stronger supernatural attribute and constantly attack from super long distances to sap the opponent's physical strength. When Liang Yu's physical strength and supernatural energy can no longer support her, or if she makes a mistake during the battle, he can take advantage of the situation and end the fight with one strike. Percival, a member of the Knights of the Round Table and a holy knight, was looking down at the ground with a confused expression on his face. He had been told that his opponent was the strongest member of the Chaos Team, a super beast that had killed countless people on the battlefield. But why was it that the one squatting quietly in front of him with its tail between its legs was a small, fluffy cat with a dark pattern on its back and a snowy white chest? Huh! He tilted his head, unable to understand what was happening. Meow! Flower opened its mouth wide and meowed. Percival's face flushed faintly, and his eyes narrowed with happiness. So cute! Little cat, are you lost? Flower's narrowed eyes opened a crack. The next moment, a terrifying power surged out of it. The supernatural terror forced Percival to take a few steps back. Flower, a cute little cat, had suddenly turned into a majestic feline beast with 2 pairs of wings on its back. It had the natural character of a king on its head, and its body was covered in a seemingly thin layer of armor that was actually incredibly tough. This was a skin suit specially tailored for it by Liu Karen, which was usually hidden among the fur and would not be burst even after it grew larger. Since Flower itself already had extremely powerful combat capabilities, this layer of armor only strengthened its defensive power. Whether it's close combat or a super long-range attack, Flower is very skilled at it. It's practically a perfect biological combat machine. Roar! After growing huge, Flower was like a primordial beast. It stood on all fours on the sea surface and let out a roar at Percival. Percival couldn't help but sigh when he saw this. It was clearly very cute just now. But he looked up at the majestic Flower. In this form, he is even more commanding. A layer of sacred golden light appeared above his body, and his golden battle armor also radiated with even more dazzling light. In the blink of an eye, his body became taller, except that his lower body and legs disappeared. In their place was the body of a centaur. He became enormous, his height comparable to Flower's, with a human upper body wearing golden armor and a huge war horse for the lower body. Sharp claws shot out from Flower's fleshy pads. Without hesitation, it opened its blood-red mouth directly, a ball of bloody energy gathering into a sphere, before suddenly erupting, transforming into a red beam of light that shot towards Percival. Percival made a gesture with his hands, and two golden energy balls appeared in his palms, transforming into two curved swords. Facing the red supernatural energy cannon, his expression did not change, and he simply slashed down with his sword. The sword light split open two spaces, with powerful energy, and it collided fiercely with the red energy cannon. The sea boiled, and a huge crater was blasted out, with millions of tons of seawater shooting up into the sky. The seawater quickly poured back, creating a stunning and magnificent sight. At this moment, Flower had already rushed towards Percival like the wind. Felines are natural hunters, and hunting creatures of the same size is no problem at all. Although it is huge, it is incredibly agile. The huge dark shadow flickered across the sea like a phantom, and the cat was already close. Pounce! The huge front paws reveal their cold, sharp claws, which are aimed at Percival and tear downwards with all their might. Percival is shocked by Flower's speed and quickly raises his double-bladed sword to defend against Flower's attack. Clang! Clang! The attack with both claws is blocked by the double-bladed sword. But what awaits Percival is Flower's frantic clawing. A cat's dynamic field of vision is very strong, and the speed of its clawing is dazzling enough. It stands up like a human being, which is enough to make it look down on the centaur in front of it. The two huge paws create afterimages because they are so fast. Swish! 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 Flower's claws swung forward thousands of times per second, like 10 sharp swords hacking away. There was no method to it, just the hunting instincts of a feline, attacking as if it were playing with a mouse. This fierce attack exceeded Percival's expectations. He was very good at dealing with people, but this was the first time he had encountered such a black chariot-level battle beast. You have to understand that Flower had always been Zhang Yi's most trusted confidant. Among the entire sanctuary, if someone eats the best, Flower is definitely second only to Zhang Yi. This is because Zhang Yi has poured a lot of resources into it. Let's just say that the Earth Centipede farm managed by the frog produces a batch of Earth Centipedes every month that are as fat as pork and have a high supernatural ability index. They are Flower's snacks, and he eats them like spicy snacks, whenever he feels like it. 9000 plus Earth Centipedes provide very little help in upgrading Epsilon-level mutants, but Flower can't resist eating them. Today, Flower's ability index has reached a terrifying 22,000 points. It's on par with Percival's. At times like these, the ferocity of felines is completely revealed. Percival's hands are short swords for immediate use. He is a good fighter in close combat, but where can the reaction speed of a human compare to that of a feline? Soon, he was injured in the midst of the stormy, almost never-ending collisions. Rip! The back of his left hand was grazed as he blocked Flower's claw attack with his sword, and it was this single blow that brought a large piece of flesh and blood with it. The wound left behind can already see the bone. Percival's eyes narrowed, knowing that fighting a cat like this was not cost-effective. Meow. After seeing the blood, Flower's eyes turned red. All beasts are inevitably excited when they see blood. It let out a terrifying roar, and its bloodthirsty mouth with fangs like a cobra bit towards Percival's head. Flower's biting power was no joke. If he was bitten in this way, it would be difficult to break free, even if his head was not bitten off. Percival made a move of sudden inspiration at this moment. His centaur body suddenly turned around, his hindhooves raised high, and then he fiercely kicked Flower in the chest. The strongest attack method of a horse is to rear and trample, and the power of a rear is enough to kick a lion or tiger to death. Flower did not expect this move from the horse, and by this time it was too late to dodge, so he could only use his sharp claws to defend himself. Bang! The horse's hoof still fiercely kicked Flower in the chest, but Flower's sharp claws also scratched the centaur's leg, like 10 sharp daggers. With a forceful bend, they sank deep. Flower was kicked violently into the air, and the huge feline plunged hundreds of meters into the sea. Percival was not faring any better, as Flower had torn off 2 large pieces of flesh from his centaur buttocks, staining the sea red with blood. SSSSS, damn it. Percival gnashed his teeth in pain. But he didn't have time to cry out in agony before a wave rushed at him like a sword from the distance. Under the surface of the sea, there was a huge shadow like a small mountain. Felines are good at swimming, and they can sneak under the water faster than they can on the surface. Percival's kick landed on Flower's chest, but Flower's physical fitness was already extremely high, and with the protection of his armor, he was only a little bit stuffy in the chest. Cats have 9 lives, and it's no joke. An attack of this magnitude is practically painless. Percival had already seen the ferocity of a feline in close combat, and he would never dare wait for Flower to get any closer.